Welcome back to the Golazzo podcast, and after another international break, we return to take a look at all things Albiceleste. Shoots of optimism for Lionel Scaloni, thanks in no small part to a sensational solo display in San Antonio, and Fernando Batista also content after an excellent week for the under-23s. So could we be about to record a positive Argentina podcast? I'm joined as ever to discuss that by co-host Tom Robinson. How's it going?
Yeah, very good, and obviously a lot better after the Lautaro Martinez wonderland that we're all living in after that performance against Mexico. So yeah, it's nice to come back on a positive note for once, as you said, Peter.
Yes, indeed it is, and perhaps not quite so positive, but we are honoured to be joined by someone who was there in person for the Lautaro show, Mexican football journalist, just back from San Antonio, Tom Marshall. How's it going?
Hi, how's it going? Yeah, not bad. Good game. Not so good for Mexico, but but yeah, I think good stuff from Argentina. No, I thought they did exactly what they needed to do and found the weaknesses, and yeah, look forward to talking about it.
Yeah, so to recap, Lionel Messi-less Argentina travelled to the United States for the latest friendlies, and after a pretty uninspiring goalless draw with Chile in Los Angeles, in an empty stadium in Los Angeles. More importantly, obviously we're going to focus on the second game, which is why Tom Marshall's with us. But in San Antonio, a few days later, Argentina comprehensively swept aside Mexico 4-0, thanks again to that blistering first half hat-trick from Lautaro Martinez. But there was probably a bit more for Argentina supporters anyway to be excited about than just the performance of Lautaro. Tom, obviously you were there, and it was probably a game beforehand which Mexico quite fancied their chances. I was certainly among those people that thought they were going to give this Argentina team some real problems. What were your takeaways from the game?
No, I mean, obviously Argentina thought were just intelligent the way they played the game. I mean, Tata Martino is not exactly unknown for fans of Argentine football, and I think Lionel Scaloni played with him. I mean, he said before the game that Tata Martino was kind of the idol when he was coming up through the Newell's Academy, and I thought he obviously studied Mexico, what they do, especially fullbacks pushing up so high, and he came up with a plan, to not press too high, to let Mexico try and play it into midfield, rob the ball quickly, and then basically hurt Mexico. And I think we saw a Mexico kind of just exposed, really. I just thought Argentina exposed the weaknesses, and let's not forget Tata Martino and Mexico came in to this game after an 11-game undefeated streak in 2019. I mean, from the Mexican side, there was a lot of kind of positivity, and there was a lot of belief that I think after 9 games without a winner against Argentina, I think stretching back to 2004, that this was the game. That Mexico were going in a really good place, playing the best team, and go up and against an Argentina team that that you guys talk about. It's not looked that good. There's still doubts about Scaloni, and Messi's not there, and this isn't the best 11. And I think you put all that into the equation, and ahead of the game, you thought this is a game where Mexico could, have got a really good chance. And then, I thought Scaloni really. I thought the other interesting dynamic was, I don't know how you guys think, but I think if you asked a lot of people in Argentine football if you'd prefer Scaloni or Tata Martino as the national team coach right now, I think a lot of them would say Tata. And for Scaloni specifically to do this to a Tata Martino team, I think gives him just a massive boost of kind of authority, for a guy who probably hasn't had too many backers so far.
Yeah, definitely. I'd say that most of us pinpoint the moment as Tata Martino leaving the Argentina national setup as quite a crucial moment in the malaise that has set in ever since. So for Scaloni to sort of the apprentice to beat the master, then I think you're right. It should give him a lot of extra credence, especially with a young experimental side without some of the star players. I mean, with Marcos Rojo at centre back and managed to get a clean sheet against what looks a very strong Mexico lineup on paper. I think that once again, it's going to be one of these impressive friendly results for Argentina, but there's always that caveat of, but it is just a friendly, and we kind of need to see a bit more in competitive fixtures, as well as the amazing performance of Lautaro. There was very encouraging signs from Ezequiel Palacios, who I thought put in a great display and was probably the second best Argentina player on display there. Seemed to have a really good relationship with Martinez, and he got a really nice assist for the second goal. And some positives. Monty L, Martinez Cuarta, looking solid in their sort of some of their first games for the national team. So it's definitely, we're kind of building up a little bit of positivity that we had at the start of Scaloni's regime, and then it kind of dissipated somewhat. But I still get the feeling that, are we any closer to knowing Argentina's starting 11? I mean, what do you think, Peter? Is this just a one-off performance, or do you think this is steps in the right direction?
I think a bit of both, actually. I mean, I think all those players that you mentioned there, and the fact that they're the younger players is a huge positive. I think for finally the Argentina midfield, which has been a problem for a long time, is beginning to take shape. I think Leandro Paredes is beginning to be the player that so many people had wanted him to be for a long time, but he never really produced. Rodrigo de Paul is, I think, proving a lot of people wrong who probably would have said, I'm not sure he's really at that level. So there's a lot of really encouraging signs in the midfield. Huge question marks still over a lot of the midfield. The defence, I should say, as you mentioned, Marcos Rojo. And I think when you looked at that Mexican front three before the game, for good reason, you kind of thought, if Mexico do see a lot of the ball, I worry about what Jimenez, for example, could do if he gets up against Marcos Rojo. But obviously, in the end, they weren't really tested a great deal. A couple of questions on that came in, sort of one for the first one Stop Albiceleste sent a message in, which first part of it I'll send to you, Tom Marshall, that he said, as it was a positive result, how much was that down to Mexico allowing Argentina to look so good?
I mean, I don't think so. I mean, I think this was a really strong Mexico team. Mexico playing at home, basically. Probably 90% of 56,000 people there. And I think Scaloni he mentioned that before as well. This is a test for us. And so, no, I think it was the game plan as well. I don't think it was just the players. I thought the game plan from Scaloni was, just very, very good. He knew exactly what Tata Martino how he was gonna go about the game, and he carried it out. And I think that, you look at the individual talent that on both teams and what Argentina have, and I just thought tactically Argentina was superior on the day. And obviously, when you take the chances like Lautaro did, then it obviously helps. But yeah, I think it was just a really good performance from Argentina. Obviously, I don't know. I just think it was they did exactly what they wanted to do. They carried out the game plan, and it just perfectly came together. And I thought, more than anything on the defensive side, yeah, obviously, you look at the Argentine defense and you think, there are going to be opportunities for Mexico. Well, they only had a shot. The first shot on goal was the 91st minute. And so something ahead of the defense was going right. And I think the way they restricted Mexico in terms of the way they were trying to get down the wings, which is where they generally try and focus the attacks, creating 3v2s down the wings with the fullbacks pushing forward and then the kind of wingers cutting in a little bit. Argentina just completely stopped that. And at the same time, I thought McAllister and Acuna on the wing, they remained relatively high. And that's where the goals came from, through the counter attacks. Once Argentina got the ball, they used it really quickly to get it forward. And yeah, I thought it was more. I think you got to give more credit to Argentina, although some of the Mexico's individual mistakes were pretty terrible. But then again, that's because they didn't know where they were going with the ball. The usual kind of passing patterns that Mexico use down the wings. Team intelligent enough to cut them off, and obviously they took advantage.
Yeah, so I mean, if we were to take that on board and give that credit to Argentina. And that follows on. Ashley Pearce sent in a question. So Tom Robinson, he said, does the Mexico win in that case, and the formations, tactics that Scaloni used, does that now present a bit of a problem? Because he seems to have more tactical flexibility and idea of play when Messi isn't available. So, I mean, we're not going to see Messi in the next friendlies anyway, so that doesn't automatically become a problem. But how do you read that situation?
Yeah, it's a difficult question really to answer, because it's, at the end of the day, it's a nice headache to have. I mean, any side that's got the option of playing Messi is going to be better for it. And I think the fact that they can learn to stand on their own 2 feet when Messi isn't there is going to stand them in good stead, because yeah, who knows how long he's going to go on for the national team, or if he gets injured, they don't want to just be clueless. So the fact that they are drawing up nice tactical schemes, some good personnel who feel like they can play a number of ways against different opposition, I think has got to stand them in good stead for the future when they don't have Messi in the side. But yes, it is a very interesting scenario now, in terms of, obviously Messi is going to come back into the side, but where does he really fit in? Obviously, Lautaro has been, a massive positive aspect of Scaloni's regime so far. 9 goals in 13, and he was just so sharp, so strong, so clinical, and he's got to be in Argentina's squads going forward. And it's just a question of how do you get him, Agüero and Messi all in the same forward line, but also then have that protection, because Messi's not going to track back. And I think that's partly what we saw in the game against Mexico, is that Acuna, McAllister, they're happy to track back, do their defensive duties. They give the side a bit more balance. So I think it's still a big question mark of how is Scaloni's going to find a team that's defensively solid, and that can allow Messi to do the brilliant things that he does on the ball. So while it certainly is going to be interesting to see how that dynamic goes forward, I think you can only see it as a positive, if not necessarily being a definite answer right now. But yeah, as I said, I think we all thought after the World Cup that maybe this Argentina team needed to stand on its own 2 feet for a year or two before Messi was reintegrated into the squad. Obviously, he came back quicker than that. But I think the fact they've shown that tactical maturity, as Tom said, for a young and inexperienced side against a really good Mexico side that have been on great form lately, I think that can only be a positive thing. One thing I wanted to ask Tom as well is, I mean, how's the result gone down over there in Mexico? Have they just seen it as a bit of a blip, or against a traditional bogey team really for Mexico, or have they kind of panicked about maybe some parallels to that 7-0 loss against Chile? Obviously, in a much less important match, but are there kind of worries that Tata's regime maybe isn't as foolproof as it might have seemed?
No, I mean, it's, obviously, because there was such a build-up as well, in terms of there was a lot of, on Mexican TV, people were, genuinely saying we've got a good chance now. And I think Tata Martino himself was like, we've got a good chance in the game, but Argentina are an elite team. We're not an elite team. We're on the second. And he keeps repeating it. He keeps saying Mexico are on the second rung of the ladder. My job as Mexico manager is to get us up there. And then after the game as well, he was like, it just shows us, how much we got to do. We can't be making those mistakes. But I don't know. For me, it's the Mexican dilemma. I mean, it's almost an existential dilemma the Mexican national team has had just throughout the last 20, 30 years since it's been like properly competitive. And that's, the other night they played against the United States, won 3-0. Probably the second best team in CONCACAF. They played really, really well. Scored some great goals. Showed that they've really been taking on board what Tata Martino's been training. And then the next game, you come up against Argentina, and even in Argentina without, I think it was 5 of the 11 from the semi-final defeat against Brazil, but still, a decent Argentina team, and you just get exposed. You know what I mean? And it's like within the course of 3-4 days, you see that's the CONCACAF reality of Mexico, and then that's the world elite level stage. So. Reality. So, I mean, I know that's exaggerated, you know what I mean? But, and obviously without the individual mistakes, then maybe it's not going to be 4-0. But, I think that's how it's gone down in Mexico. And then it reopens the whole debate about how do you make that step up. Tata Martino saying afterwards that, he wants to play more games like this against Argentina. But, every Mexico manager says that. You know what I mean? It's just like you're not in CONMEBOL. So you're not going to get those competitive games against, top teams, and that's just the reality. I mean, Mexico, if you look in the next 12 months, they've got CONCACAF Nations League October, CONCACAF Nations League November against Panama and Bermuda, and then you look next March, there's a possibility of 2 friendlies against good teams, and then June you've got CONCACAF Nations League, and then in September World Cup qualification starts. So there's just like, I don't know really what Tata's thinking when he's saying I would like to play more games, because it's not going to happen. So yeah, I think that's basically been the reaction, just kind of how are we going to get there, and there's kind of a bit of a crisis and stuff. But yeah, no, I think it is what it is. It's that's where Mexico are at, and hopefully it's kind of expectations have been kind of dumbed down a little bit, because Tata Martino, we've seen what he did with Paraguay, we saw what he did with Argentina, with Newell's as well. I mean, he's a very good manager, and if he's given time to work, and it looks like he's been given these kind of mini camps to work with youngsters who are domestic based. So he's getting these players from Liga MX for like 3 days at a time, like once a month on average, and he's kind of just working with them, just having a few training sessions. And I mean, that's how it's going to work if Mexico are going to work. But I don't know. I know I'm rambling a bit here, but I mean, you look at Argentina, and you guys, I know you talk about how the problems in Argentine football with the federation, with everything that goes on. But if there's one thing that Argentine football has and has remained pretty consistent, is that it produces players. I mean, players just keep coming out, and you look at the clubs that these players are playing for, and over the next 3-4 years that some of those guys that we saw who were domestic on against Mexico, in 3 years' time, they're going to be playing for top clubs. The likes of McAllister, Palacios, if he doesn't go to Miami. But those players from the Argentine league are going to go to the top clubs, whereas Mexico, that's the other issue. There isn't that kind of conveyor belt going from the domestic league to the elite leagues, and I think that's another problem for Mexico.
Yes, an interesting subject, because obviously one of the bones of contention which almost led to Tata leaving was the fact that he wanted so much say over the youth sides in Argentina. Obviously it was in the build-up to the Olympics last time round that he ended up walking away. Now you're obviously mentioning some of the things that he's doing with the youth sides in Mexico and trying to get his hands on the younger players early. Is there an expectation, like, for a sort of long-term plan with Tata at the helm, and sort of is that looked at positively in Mexico?
Yeah, I mean, I think Tata, the best thing, if you had to name one thing of why Mexico can do something at the next World Cup, it would be, obviously there's a decent group of players, but I think most people out there are, accustomed to Mexico being quite good, and I think with Tata, I think, that's the biggest thing. I mean, I think if you look at the world level and you go through all the international teams, there's not many, for me anyways, international managers that are better than him. And I think that's the major positive. And the fact that they're opening up, and like the Argentine clubs didn't with the Olympic process, the Mexican clubs are giving him 3-4 days here and there to work with these kids. Then I think that's a major positive. And Tata actually said before the game, he said, obviously Argentina have got a better team overall, but he said these Mexican players coming through are kind of on par with what Argentina have coming through. But we'll see. I mean, I always think that if you look at the amount of kids coming through the Argentine league, I don't know, it's probably, and then you look at the amount coming through the Liga MX, which is a lot of foreign players. I mean, a lot of very good Argentines as well. Then I don't know, the Mexican players have to succeed, whereas the Argentines, if you got 5 and only 2 succeed, then you got two players. Whereas in Mexico, if you've got two players, you're hoping one of them succeeds. So I just think the volume of players coming through, that's another issue for Mexico compared to Argentina. But we'll see what Tata can do, because I think if anyone can do it, anybody realistically that Mexico could attract, I think Tata is absolutely ideal.
Yeah, certainly, and I think as you mentioned before, plenty of Argentinian fans would probably have him back as well. And on that subject of Argentinians playing in Liga MX, I wanted to pick your brains about a couple of players who play there or have played there recently. I mean, we didn't see them in this game, but I think it'd be interesting to get your input and your point of view on Guido Rodriguez, who's sort of been in and around the Argentina squad, and also Marquezin, who's obviously now gone to Porto. But you've obviously seen a lot of both of those players in recent years, and what your thoughts on them?
No, yeah, definitely. I mean, I think Guido Rodriguez, you could argue. Did you say Guido Rodriguez or Guido Pizarro?
Rodriguez, yeah.
Rodriguez, yeah. I get mixed up between them, but because they're pretty similar. But no, I think Guido Rodriguez is really, I don't know, for me, you could argue he's the best player in Liga MX. I mean, obviously he doesn't get the attention because he's not a striker and he's not, banging in the goals. But I don't know, for me, he's just such a vital part of Club America. And yeah, I mean, I think the only thing with Guido Rodriguez now is, I mean, I think we saw was it the first Copa America game where he didn't play very well at all. Is that right?
Yeah, he did. I mean, yeah, he didn't have the best one.
Yeah, I mean, he needs time, and ideally, I mean, I think it's the same. You could say the same thing that you could say with the top Mexican players in Liga MX. At some point, you'd want them to move to Europe, and you'd want them to go to Spain and to then really test themselves and see how much they've got. I think we saw kind of with Guido Pizarro. I mean, when he went to Sevilla, he started okay, and then he didn't quite adapt, and then he goes back to Tigres, and I think he found his kind of level then, you know what I mean? And I think that with Guido Rodriguez, I think that's what he needs to do as well. I mean, and then with Marchesín, yeah, he's just a very, very good goalkeeper, capable of the odd mistake. He's definitely made a couple of mistakes over his time at Santos Laguna and America, but just a massive personality as well. I mean, there's somebody in the dressing room who's gets everybody else going. He's a bit crazy as well. He's known to be a bit nuts, a real shot stopper, brave, likes coming out, and yeah, a good goalkeeper.
Yeah, well, I mean, I know you need to get off now, Tom, so we're not going to keep you any longer while we go on about Argentina. I'm sure you've seen and read more than enough over the last week. So I will let you get off. But thanks very much for joining us this evening.
No, thanks a lot for the invite, and yeah, we'll speak soon.
Okay, so I mean, one of the standouts from obviously that Mexico game was Lautaro Martinez. You can't get away from how good he looked in that first 45 minutes. I mean, I know Tom Marshall there was giving a lot of credit to Argentina, but the manner in which Lautaro bullied the Mexican centre-halves was frightening. Tom, I mean, do you think now, although it was only a friendly, and although you can look at the statistics, 9 goals in 13, which is, much better than Messi, better than Aguero, better than Higuain, better than Maradona, can you now say that he should be Argentina's first choice number 9? And then if you play with one up top, does that then relegate Sergio Aguero back to just being a bench player?
It's a tricky one, isn't it? Because I think you'd be sort of mad not to start Martinez. And I think he's shown that he does deserve that kind of lead striker role rather than maybe the supporting cast to someone like Aguero. But to be fair, Martinez does have that capability to play just off the strike or come from, he's not an out and out wide player by any means, but we've definitely seen in the past that he can link up, and I think he does work well with another striker. So whether you see him as someone who's going to be the focal point with maybe Messi just doing Messi things around him, and then that gives you enough maybe creative input with still having maybe the balance and the width and the discipline further back, or whether you can somehow crowbar all three of them in, and whether that takes something away from Martinez's game if he's kind of relegated to maybe cutting in from the left and Messi kind of drifting in from the right, whether that's kind of complicates matters. I think that's something that needs to be worked on and seen if it can work. But I think Martinez he'd feel very upset, I think, if he's not got a starting berth for the upcoming games and the foreseeable future. I mean, you do have to look at even though that scoring record is fantastic, I think you do have to look at maybe some of the teams that he's scored against. I mean, this is definitely a standout performance from him, a hat-trick against a really good Mexico side, and the manner in which he took the goals, particularly the first goal, he just kind of bounced off several players, went around them all and scored, and also the final one, he just brushed the Mexican defender aside as if he wasn't there. But, he scored against Venezuela, Qatar, a couple against Nicaragua, Venezuela again, and that maybe he still needs to show that he's capable of scoring at the top level against real high class opponents. So maybe you could throw that in, with Aguero still on fantastic form for Man City, that you could make an argument that Martinez still has a little bit to prove. But for me, it's been clear for quite a long time that he's an elite player with an elite mentality, and he should really be there. I mean, what are your thoughts on the situation, Peter?
Yeah, it's difficult because I think against really strong opposition, I don't know if Argentina can get away with playing the two of them.
Yeah.
Because it would leave them slightly short, I think, in midfield. Certainly if you assume that at some point Messi is definitely going to be in there. So if you're going to say Messi, Aguero and Martinez, it's a bold selection if you select all three. So it's a difficult one, as was the case with Messi. It's a very nice position to be in, to have two centre forwards of that calibre. But it might be one where it just has to be adapted to the opposition, and we'll have to see who eventually gets that out and out, who's the first choice when they're both available, when Messi's available, and we see it against top opposition. Who does Scaloni choose if he does play with one? I think Aguero now, regardless of what he does for Man City, does have stiff competition. And I mean, like you say, I think it would be harsh for Lautaro to lose his place, and he does just fit into that system. He seemed very comfortable in that opening 45 minutes against Mexico. He's got all the attributes that you kind of want from him. They're not playing the ball in the air, but he's got that pace to go in behind. He's got that strength on the ball. He's very difficult once he has the ball in his feet. He's always had that since even when he was a kid. When he came into the team at Racing, he had that ability of just being very difficult to knock off the ball. So he's not a sort of natural target man as such, but once it is in his feet, it sticks. And he is able to link up play. So he is very adept in that position. And I think, it's going to be a real interesting challenge to see who out of the two of them get in. I mean, Barrington Brown on Facebook said that he thinks Scaloni needs to stick to a 4-4-2, use the same midfield that he had over this week, I think, but call Aguero and play Aguero and Martinez. And the second part of the question from One Stop Albiceleste a bit earlier, he said, that account asked what to expect from the Germany friendly. So would you be expecting then to maybe see a 4-4-2 in the next break with Aguero and Martinez, but then otherwise the midfield fairly similar?
Yeah, I'd like to see that. Definitely to see what those two can do together. As you said, I think against top level teams that they can't play three attacking players, especially those who maybe don't do as much defensive duties. I think it's quite a good time to play Germany because they're not in their best moment. And I know that Martino there was saying that Argentina are an elite side, but I think that's being a bit generous to the current iteration of Argentina. So it would be very interesting because I think almost this Mexico game showed the template of what Argentina or this Argentina side need to do against more settled, more high quality opponents is stay compact, try and hit them on the break. I would like to see maybe 2 up top, because I think if Martinez is on his own up against genuine quality defenders, then he might struggle for for a partner, for service. So I think that's a good idea. Certainly, we've seen from the midfield, the De Paul looks like he's is a really good option there, either being kind of more central or on the right. Paredes is growing into the game. We mentioned Palacios as a really good option, and certainly if Lo Celso, I'm sticking with that pronunciation, is going to be out for a month or so, then this could be a really fantastic opportunity for Palacios to get in there. It was interesting to see Acuna further forward, because obviously he's been used as a left back for quite a long time now, or a makeshift wing back. But I think it was good to see him in a more attacking role, which I think suits him better as an out and out winger. So that was good. I think the main takeaway is the fact that there are options, and even with the likes of McAllister getting a start, and Nico Dominguez coming on both games and looking the part, that's only going to be a positive. It's suddenly gone from a case where there just seemed to be a gaping hole in midfield to now actually having 3 or 4 guys that you would definitely start in there on a regular basis, and have the potential to grow into even better players, with a few guys snapping at their heels and being competitive. So I think the midfield is definitely an area that seems to be, out of every sort of area on the pitch, the one that seems to be solidifying the fastest.
Yeah, I think Palacios was a blow for the Copa America just gone when he got injured in the build-ups. I think he would have played quite an important role. Scaloni certainly seems to rate him. And likewise, someone like Sriracho from Racing is sort of on the cusp as well. And suddenly, as you say, from having a real dearth of midfielders or those players that are able to break up play but also get forward at pace, Argentina do seem to have an abundance of those players coming through, which is good to see. You mentioned a couple of new faces like McAllister and Dominguez, and we'll get on to a few of the younger players when we talk about the under-23s and a question later on. But Scaloni did say in this window, this week that we've just seen, that he was going to test out and take a look at some of the younger players, and in the next international break, we'll probably see slightly less of that as he looks to narrow down some of his options before a very important 2020. So do you think, or who do you think will likely be cut, and who do you think he'll start moulding the team around from next international break onwards?
Yeah, I think the likes of McAllister, Dominguez, Sriracho probably won't get the call up for the next round. I think Palacios, out of all of them, obviously he's a favourite of Scaloni, but I think he really, I've been a huge fan of him for a while. He's got all the attributes that you see and think this guy is suited to the modern European game, and I think he's got the potential to really go to the top. He's versatile. He can sit back and sort of play a more withdrawn role, but he's got the energy and pace to break forward. He's shown that he's got that vision in the final third as well. The assist for the second goal, as I mentioned earlier, was really, really good, and he can press. He's got a bit of everything about him. I really like him, and I think Argentina have been lacking that kind of box to box, for want of a better description, midfielder. So I think that he's going to be someone who's kept in the first team, and the likes of Dominguez, McAllister, Sriracho, I think they'll be the kind of guys who you might see sort of more slowly integrated into the team. I think it was nice that they were kind of given a bit of game time to show that, yes, you are in my plans, but they're all under, or 21 or under. The same with Gaich and Balerdi coming off the bench for their debuts as well. I thought that was a nice touch. But I think realistically, he's going to stick to the main guys, and the likes of, maybe give the likes of Lanzini and Pereira more of a chance to sort of solidify them, because he knows he can count on them. They've got the experience to deal with the threat that Germany offers. So it's I like. We've always said that Scaloni's sort of way of bringing through the youth has been quite a positive aspect, and it's good to see him trying out a few more faces who've deserved the call up, because they've been, certainly McAllister and Dominguez have been very good in the domestic league for the last year or so.
Yeah, and on that same subject, I mean, you mentioned Palacios, and I think you're right in saying that he probably is, of that younger crop, the one that seems most certain of a continued place in the senior squad, because I think we are going to see a lot of interchanging now between the senior squad and the under-23s in an Olympic year coming up. One of those, a River teammate, young player, Lukas Martinez Quarta, impressed this week, drew a lot of headlines from the goalless draw against Chile. And we're talking about the options in midfield, but as ever, when we look at the defence, it's not quite so healthy, as perhaps is obvious when Marcos Rojo turns out for Argentina at this point in his career. But Martinez Quarta was a plus. Do you think he's going to play a significant role going forward then in that new look defence?
I hope so, because as you said, he had a very good game against Chile. Not only is he 2 starts, 2 clean sheets, that's got to be a good thing, but also he showed that he was a threat aerially going forward, hit the bar, had another good header against Chile, and also he's someone who can play the ball out from the back. He's got a good diagonal pass on him that Gallardo really likes to use for River, and he can break the lines with some of his passing out of defence. So it's an area where there's not loads of options, and I feel like he's as good as sort of any of the other young prospects coming through. Certainly, you'd put him on, maybe not a level with Martinez over at Ajax, especially now that he's getting European football. But he's certainly, I'd say, a breath of fresh air when it comes to the likes of Otamendi and Rojo, and I think Petzela's still going to be one of the main guys. But I think there's a spot there to partner him, and Martinez Quarta definitely has the qualities that I think have gone under the radar a little bit. I'm surprised that he's not already made the move from River a bit sooner, but he has had a bit of an up and down career in terms of the drugs ban that he had for a little while, but he seems to be sort of slowly getting back to the form that he's shown in his best moments for River. I mean, what did you think of him and also Monty L?
Yeah, I mean, I think both performed very well during this week. The Chile game was probably more of a test defensively. I'm never, as I think we mentioned in a previous pod, that I don't know if Monty L is a really top quality long-term right back. I think he's just kind of fitted into that position at River and then done well, and it's been a huge plus for River, the fact that he's adapted to that position, but isn't perhaps the most natural modern fullback. So is a decent option for Argentina. Whether he's the guy who's going to solve that position for the next several years, I don't know. And I think Martinez Quarta is, as you say, one of the best options from that younger group coming through. And although we've been bemoaning the problems in central defence, when we get on to the under-23s, there are some decent names coming through that you could perhaps say are going to provide competition. It brings us into Jimmy Lee's question from the Belgrano in English Twitter pretty nicely, that when he said from the 2 friendlies, which positions seemed weak, and where does Scaloni probably need to try out a few more faces? I mean, do you think right back's one of those, and centre back for that matter?
Yeah, I mean, I think from the friendlies, they've not necessarily shown up as positions of weakness, because as we've mentioned there, 2 clean sheets, 2 perfectly laudable performances, a right back for Monty L, and so I'd certainly say I'd rather have Monty L a right back than Foyth. I think Foyth, when we're talking about maybe the future of the Argentinian defence, is probably the one that's been earmarked by by Scaloni and the team as the guy going forward, but he's still raw. Mm-hmm. So that's why I don't mind Martinez Quarta providing a bit of competition for him, maybe alongside Patella, but definitely defence is still the weakness. Tagliafico's got left back nailed down, but who is there really to challenge him at the moment? I think right back is still wide open for someone to come in. I know that Jimmy would love to see Tommy Guidara given a chance there, and hopefully he does, because he's a cracking player. But I think if you've got a mixture of your more defensive-minded players like Monty L, or perhaps Foyth out of position there, to the guys who are maybe a bit more free-flowing going forward, like Saravia, Bustos, and Guidara would probably, well, he'd be a nice sort of mix of both defensive solidity and also someone who can get forward, has good pace, and give you a bit of width. But I think that is the one area that's wide open for someone to really make it their own. I think there's question marks about numerous players, but as we've mentioned, more in kind of a nice headache to have, is like, oh, how do you fit in Martinez and Agüero and Messi? Especially with Lo Celso getting injured, it's a case of who can step up and maybe take that place. I think we're slowly seeing the team moulding into something, and it's more a question of, right, where's our depth now? I think goalkeeper's still probably up for grabs as well, because there's not a lot to choose between Marchesín, Andrada and Armani. Again, we saw two different keepers in each game, Marchesín versus Chile and Andrada versus Mexico. Admittedly, neither of them had loads to do, but I think they're all three are perfectly good options. They're all great shot stoppers. I think maybe Andrada gives you a bit more sort of command of the crosses and high balls coming in with his extra height. But the way Marchesín's been playing in Europe, I think potentially could see him creep ahead. I'm not too sure, and I think some of the other alternatives that are out there, like Musso, like Rulli, if he ever gets back in there. I think there's 5 or 6 Argentinian goalkeepers out there who are all kind of perfect, kind of 6 or 7s out of 10s. No one who's really jumped to the head of the queue just yet. So there's question marks still, don't get me wrong, but I think we're seeing more and more a familiar side, or at least I think so. What about you, Peter? What do you think?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think in terms of going back to Jimmy's question, is still the defence where most of those questions remain. But there are the options that we're seeing already. What we're going to see form the base of the squad now. That's going to get slowly trimmed down, I guess, over the next friendlies, and then going into certainly the start of 2020 when World Cup qualification starts. I was going to mention obviously the goalkeepers. I think, as you rightly point out, that there's very little between the options, and it's interesting to have an international break where Franco Armani didn't feature. So it'll be interesting to see going forward whether Armani remains number one for now, because I think certainly in Argentina now there does seem to be, maybe just because of some of the Boca press being vocal, pushing maybe Andrada towards the number one spot, and then them not really paying too much attention to whatever Marchesín does, because he's not playing in Argentina. So it's an interesting one to see where they go, because you'd have to argue that if Marchesín was performing at a very high level in Europe, then you'd wonder whether that puts him in pole position. And certainly I think he's been a little bit unfortunate not to get many chances previously, when you think of the consistent level of performance he's had at club level, going all the way back to Lanús and then in Mexico. But I just think being at an unfashionable club in Argentina and then going off to Mexico has meant he's sort of gone under the radar somewhat. So that's a question mark for Scaloni. But yeah, just the defence really. But otherwise, it's some quite nice headaches to have when we look at all those other positions that we mentioned in terms of who's first choice up front and who comes into that midfield, because there are now options. And some of those options do come from those young players, and Jimmy Lee followed that on by saying he didn't get the chance to watch the under-23s, who also had 2 friendlies during this break. He said, did anyone from that group stand out and deserve a call-up? Now, just to recap, the under-23s had a friendly against Bolivia at Banfield. They won 5-0. Julian Alvarez, Carlos Valenzuela, and then an Ezequiel Ponce hat-trick in the second half was the first. And then they followed that up with a 3-1 win over Colombia on Sunday. At Argentina's juniors ground, Nico Gonzalez, back in La Paternal, opened the score, or equalised. Matias Vargas with a penalty, and then Julian Carranza with the third late on. We said, obviously...
And you were there, weren't you?
Yeah, I was there, yeah. I took advantage of the fact.
How was it?
No, I mean, it was great to see, take an opportunity to see the under-23s, and for free as well. I mean, because they basically said... They had an initiative for these under-23 games where if you took along some food for, like, the charity, like a sort of food bank, then you got your ticket for free. So,
what did you bring?
Some tins of some stuff and all that sort of
Tins of stuff.
Tins of stuff, you know. But yeah, a nice initiative, and it led to a pretty friendly but quite busy Estadio Diego Armando Maradona on Sunday afternoon for the Colombia game, which was pretty entertaining, and a very strong under-23 group, which again sort of does give reasons for positivity. I think some of the players that we mentioned when we were talking about the senior team getting debuts, Alexis McAllister, Nico Dominguez, Leonardo Balerdi, and Adolfo Gaich, off the top, or at least those 4 certainly, they probably have more of a chance of being involved with that Olympic side under Batista going forward. He has the makings of a pretty good team there, doesn't he, Tom?
Yeah, no, as you said, I was pretty impressed with their performances, and certainly the amount of talent they could draw upon. I was a bit surprised he said that especially the likes of Balerdi and Gaich got the nod for the senior team when you had Lautaro Martínez, who's been certainly, from by all accounts, he seems to have taken to life in Holland as really well, and is impressing a lot of people over there. And it's especially given that he is a few years older than Balerdi as well. You think, okay, his time's ready for the senior national team. Likewise for Monito Vargas, who's done all right for Espanyol since he's moved there, and you'd maybe want to see him as an option, maybe on the left, cutting in for the national team. I think he's got as good a shout as the likes of Acuna or Campos, who got called up to the senior national team. So yeah, it was a bit surprising just how strong the under 23s are, but it's nice to see the likes of Acacibar, Christian Romero, who's obviously got the move to Juve, and even some old, I say old faces, but Ezequiel Ponce, he seems to have been around forever, and I'd kind of forgotten about his. I didn't even really think he was in the picture for the national team, but for him to come in, get a hat trick against Bolivia, and also the likes of Nicolas Gonzalez. It's just positive that these guys who leave Argentina quite early are still kind of being kept in consideration, and I think out of all of them, the one that I'm most intrigued and excited about is Valenzuela. What did you make of him, seeing him in the flesh?
Yeah, I mean, he came on in the second half in the second game against Colombia, so he didn't get to see a huge amount of him, but certainly from the Pan American games, along with Gaich, was the guy that really stood out and looks a really interesting prospect, considering he's at Barracas Central, and you'd expect, if he maintains this kind of level of performance for under 23s, he's going to be getting a move sooner or later, because he has such trickery on the ball. He opens space, and with that left foot when he cuts inside, because he sort of is able to drift all over the pitch, really. When he did come on against Colombia, he was often coming up on the right and just cutting back inside to put some good balls into the box. But he's a really exciting prospect, and one which sort of did come out from nowhere when most of the eyes are on the fact that those players that you mentioned have gone to Europe or at the bigger clubs in Argentina. So certainly someone to keep an eye on. Equally, I was surprised the fact that Lautaro Martinez was involved in this team, especially because Balerdi was with the seniors. I didn't quite understand that, but it was great to be able to see Lautaro Martinez with Cristian Romero in central defence, because I think the pair of them have the potential to be a top pairing going forward in their careers. And I just love the way that Martinez, for a centre back, all his passes are forward. You know, it's just so nice to see a young player with that kind of confidence on the ball. And rather than just rolling it across the back four or to the full-back, he's nearly always got his head up and cutting between the lines to like launch moves forward, and then just gives the base of so many attacks. So I thought he was very good. The defence was very good. Valenzuela impressed over the course of the two games, as he did in the Pan American Games. And I think Ponce, his hat-trick was probably the easiest hat-trick you're ever going to see. But I think if you were to put Gaich in his place as the number 9, someone who obviously did excel at the Under-20 World Cup as well, and then again at the Pan American Games, then that team going into the Olympic year is starting to look really good. I don't know what the thoughts would be about overage players and where they might fit in. But even just with the under-23s, and obviously Ezequiel Barco as well was pulled out injured. He would be competing, you'd imagine, with Vargas for that left-sided role, or if you wanted to play him as a number 10 in behind. But some really good options there. And it's quite an exciting group to see that number of options in different positions. Central defence, in midfield. We mentioned Ascasibar, but you saw Colombato come off the bench and do well. And just a lot of options in several positions. So it's a really healthy position for Argentina to be in, considering for so many years we've sort of been bemoaning the lack of the youth side.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, Julian Alvarez is another one who's looked really good for River. And yeah, like you said, there are good players all over the pitch really for Argentina. There's a few that you think, I expect you to kind of move up to the national team. Certainly, Martinez and Romero have got to be in the same conversation as Foyth, Balerdi and Martinez Cuarta. And then you've got some good competition for places there. I think what helps as well, if memory serves me, back at the under 20s in 2017, I think Martinez and Romero played together there, and I mean that was a terrible campaign for Argentina by all accounts. But the fact that they know each other and they've got a bit of a relationship, and now they've got a bit more experience under their belt, I think definitely helps. And I think there's got to be positives to take forward. There's plenty of guys like Nicolas Gonzalez, like Julian Carranza, who are very talented, but you wouldn't bet your house on them becoming regulars for the national team just yet. But you could definitely imagine quite a few players from that squad going on to have pretty important roles for the senior team. So there does seem to finally, at long last, be some joined up thinking. The fact that plenty of clubs have allowed important players to go for these for these Pan American Games, for these matches as well, and certainly if they're looking to play, I think in January there's some more fixtures off the top of my head. If they're able to get names at this level for that as well, then that's only going to help the Argentinian national team, and obviously the Olympic Games is a much bigger deal for South American nations than I think we give it credit for anyway in Europe, and they'll be desperate to do well at that tournament.
Yeah, and I think that's maybe why, just to go back to Jimmy's question, why some of those players may not be fast-tracked as quickly as they may ordinarily have been into the senior squad. Because I think we do have that core of the senior team that we mentioned. And then I think Argentina do seem to be putting quite a lot of attention on the Olympics. In January, February, there's the pre-Olympic tournament, which is what they're basically preparing for. So I think the idea is every time we have an international break, Batista's going to be able to take an under-23 squad to do some friendlies, work on that, to narrow his options down for that pre-Olympic tournament at the start of 2020 for qualification into the Olympics. And then going forward, I think post-Olympics, we'll probably start to see who from that team pushes on. So I think in the first part of World Cup qualification, we'll probably see Scaloni stick with what he has. But I think it'll be good for Argentina having such a potentially strong Olympic side. Who knows? Maybe going to Japan as potential winners, and then moving forward with a fresh group of young players to start slowly coming into that squad for the second half of World Cup qualification could be a really good position to be in.
Yeah, definitely. And I think one player that maybe we would have expected to have kicked on a bit further by now is Akasibar. What did you make of him? And it seems like the kind of role of a more traditional destroyer, defensive midfielder in the senior national team. There doesn't seem to really be necessarily a player of that ilk. I don't know whether that's more a case of looking to move away from that in terms of style, or whether they're looking, or whether they feel that maybe Akasibar and Santiago Cáceres as well are maybe not quite ready for the national team just yet. But I feel like even though the midfield's looking strong for the senior national team, and Paredes seems to be the number 5 who's going to start every game, they kind of do lack a more out and out defensive midfielder, if that kind of makes sense. What do you make of his performance, and what do you think of his chances for the national team as well?
Yeah, I think you're right to point out that is something that is lacking, but Scaloni doesn't seem that wedded to the idea of playing that type of player. But I thought what we saw from Ascasibar against Colombia on Sunday was certainly what I think we all fell in love with when he came into that Estudiantes team. He was everywhere. He was putting his foot in, winning the ball, and it was a really good performance. He's always a little bit rash when he goes into his tackles, but at the same time, it is part of his game. You wouldn't really want to diminish that too much. I think it's a good area for him to be in, to perhaps take up that role for the under-23s and then see where he could move on from after that. But I thought the midfield looked pretty good for the under-23s. Nicolas Capaldo came from Boca after a good start to the season with Boca. Lucas Robertoni as well. So I think for now, Ascasibar can be a really important figure in his natural position for the under-23s, and then going forward maybe can come into the senior setup as an option if they need to shore things up defensively. But I don't necessarily look at how Scaloni's playing and say necessarily, you need that destroyer in there, because I think Paredes, from what he even says, seems more comfortable sitting there on his own almost.
Yeah, definitely more of a Rolls Royce at the back of midfield there, and yeah, it's going to be interesting, and I think it's plenty of positives to take out of it, and it's gonna maybe for once we can kind of look with optimism at the upcoming years for Argentina.
Yeah, well, you'd certainly like to think so. We've got obviously another international break. Was it October, November, or both? But they have that game against Germany. So Scaloni will be able to narrow down his ideas. Batista the same, as we go into what is actually going to be a pretty important year for Argentina, although it's another Copa America just 1 year after, which you could debate how serious having a Copa America is every year. But with World Cup qualification starting as well, it's an important time for both sides to start getting their ideas solidified, and we'll see some of those younger players coming through. So exciting times, hopefully, for Argentina, and hopefully we will, or some of the players that we've mentioned, we will start seeing coming through. So I think we'll leave it there. As ever, Tom, thanks very much for coming on.
No worries. It's always a pleasure, and look forward to the next one.
Yeah, hopefully not too long. We'll try and get another one, perhaps European-based again, in the next week or so. And then, we'll be back for another international break in the not too distant. Be sure to follow Tom Robinson on Twitter at TomRobbo89 and our earlier guest Tom Marshall for the latest Mexican football news on his Twitter at Mexico World Cup. If you've enjoyed the podcast and you got this far, well done, and please like, subscribe, share, whatever you can do to support and give us a much needed kick up the arse to get a few more of these done. Thanks again, and hopefully we'll be speaking to you again soon.